Are we saying that Google is now at a point where it's actually going to start to fail because of the sheer volume, the sheer weight of content that's out there?
I'll go a step further and risk the ire of the internet. I think it's been happening for quite a while. I think they've just been dishonest about it. We've been talking quite a lot in the past few podcasts about this idea that Google is sort of struggling to index because of the explosion in AI-generated content, and partly because for a very long time Google was banging this drum that, like, to be successful on the internet, you have to produce lots of content.
It was interpreted as that.
Yeah,
they were basically saying, provide the content that people are looking for.
Sure, but for a long time, content is king was like the mantra, right? And every agency would just be, just produce content. You know, you just need more content on your website. And Google are, I think, now in a place where the internet is so saturated with content and there's so much new content being produced all the time that they are actually struggling a little bit to keep up with it. Back on, I think it was December the 10th, where they basically just said, like, oh, sorry, we're encountering issues. A small number of websites may experience indexing problems. But then also they've recently released a load of guidelines which basically says, you know how on a lot of websites you can create sort of like filter systems and they generate what's called faceted navigation, as in you'll have a version of a page, but then you'll have a version of the page that's like filtered on. And for a long time, obviously Google has said, like, oh, if you're doing that and those pages are sort of pointless, like if you have an e-commerce site and you have t-shirts and you have them in 50 different colors and each filter creates a new page that doesn't really add any value, it's probably best not to do that. And they're now saying specifically...
Best for Google, because it can't index it all.
Well, they're now saying specifically that your website will suffer if you have all of this faceted navigation and you're sort of taxing its computing resources, their words. So they're giving advice for people to say, like, you know, make sure those pages are no indexed, make sure they're no follow, make sure you block them in your robots.txt file, that sort of thing. And it's quite interesting because it comes on the back of this idea that Google is sort of struggling to keep up, and they're now turning around and saying, you know, please make sure that all of the thousands of pages on your website that we don't need to see aren't crawlable anymore. And it does just smack of, you know, them slowly waking up to the fact that they've got a real challenge on their hands.
They do seem to, I don't know, how good are they at listening to, reading and taking cognizance of the robots file? And it seems to me that, like, are they crawling stuff that it should be pretty bloody obvious they shouldn't be crawling?
I think that's the thing that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, you have this whole concept, don't you, of like URL fragments. So Google say in their documentation that if your URL has a hash in it, then they know that everything after the hash isn't really very meaningful, for example. So that helps them. But generally, no, I think they're pretty terrible at it. I mean, there's certainly client websites that we manage where when you look in Search Console, they've crawled to random pages they shouldn't have crawled to through a page that's clearly marked no follow. So I think, you know, they're directives. They're not, you can't force Google to do anything, and they will sort of do whatever they fancy. But yeah, I just think it's really interesting because obviously the impact to web owners or web managers is that ultimately the content that you do want to get crawled and indexed isn't being crawled and indexed as much. And I think that's the really big, you know, problem that we have now, is that for a lot of our clients, it used to be the case that you'd publish something and Google would pick it up in a few days. Now it's weeks, sometimes longer. And that's just a bad experience for everybody, really. The content you're producing is much less likely to actually show up in search results pages. People were sort of talking about this on Search Engine Journal and various sort of technical SEO blogs. And they were actually saying, look, you can see Google not indexing all of this content because it doesn't have the sort of crawl budget, the resource to get through it all. Look, you can see the number of index pages on my site sort of dropping off a cliff as Google has to sort of try and claw back resource somewhere. I think it's probably been struggling for a little while. They're just not going to come out and say, actually, we can't keep up. I mean, it is millions of pages, I think, a week, potentially even a day, that get produced. So I feel for them.
It used to be really hard to produce decent, chunky content. It's now very easy. You can talk about the quality of it, and I get it. But given that AI will just keep feeding the engine, where is the end game? How are we going to make sure that the quality doesn't just fall off a cliff?
I'm not sure we can. Forbes produced a guide for B2B marketing trends in 2025, and the 17 items in that trend list, 6 of them are about not using AI to generate content anymore. They dressed it up in various ways. You know, one of them is rely less on AI content. One is make your content more human generated. I think a bunch of people are slowly waking up to the fact that actually this sort of torrent of AI rubbish is making the internet basically unusable. I just think it's potentially too late. I don't think you can put that genie back in the bottle, really. I think more and more it'll be about sort of turning towards things that can't be duped with AI, where you're putting your face and your personal brand in front of people more and more to sort of relay information.